Thank you, everyone. I'm Lori McConville, VP of Business Development and Communications with Enceva. I will be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us. Just so you know, you'll be able to ask questions at any time by typing in your question, and we'll try and get to those during our presentation today or at the end of our presentation. Welcome to our webinar, The Invisible Costs of a Private Data Center. Our focus will be on presenting you with the pros and cons of co-location, upgrading, or building a data center, including the hidden costs and return on investment. Chris is the CTO of Enceva. Chris is a passionate, creative, and transformational leader with Enceva's next generation Tier 4 Plus data center. Chris is one of your speakers today. He has a background steeped in technical strategy, vision, and disciplined execution. CV, without a doubt, has built the most unique data center in the country. Chris, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you for setting this up and providing not only us, but our viewers with an opportunity to go through some of these line items and points that we're going to go through in a little bit. So about myself, like Lori said, I'm the CTO of Enceva, which is a data center company and co-location company. My background was originally in network engineering, in which or that's what I went to school for, is network engineering. I spent the first several years of my career building networks in the Cedar Rapids, Cedar Falls, and Waterloo markets. I then later started to get into electrical and mechanical engineering and design, in which I applied my skill sets towards constructing data centers, multi-tenant data centers specifically, and essentially rounded myself off as a data center engineer is essentially what I like to classify myself as. I've been involved with several of the data center builds and management of co-location facilities in the Iowa market in the last 10 years or so. And I was also involved with a rapid data center deployment project during the Cedar Rapids floods in 2008 as well.
I bet that was an exciting time for you, Chris.
It was not a lot of sleep.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is Dan Maxey. And Dan is a wonderful guy to work with today. He's one of the greatest professionals in the power quality field that I've ever had the chance to meet. He's very creative, knowledgeable, and experienced with over 30 years experience in the industry. Dan is a master certified electronic technician, a certified power quality professional, and a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers and National Electrical Code. Dan, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate it. And thanks for everybody attending the webinar today. I'd like to start off by explaining a little bit of why I'm even in this industry. My degree is actually in microprocessor technology. If you're not familiar with what that means is my degree was actually in programming microprocessors. That happened over 30 years ago, and as you can imagine, in this industry, learning to program microprocessors 30 years ago and what I would have to do today to do the same thing it wouldn't work. Things have changed so much in this industry. The unique part about this is immediately out of college, I was hired by a company in southern Iowa to do just what my degree says, microprocessor technology, and specifically programming microprocessors. This particular company had developed a computer system to control the entire grain drying process. What I mean by that is a lot of people don't realize when you harvest corn and harvest soybeans and harvest rice, one of the processes of storing those products is to dry them to a certain moisture content so they don't rot. They had developed a computer system to control that entire process. Prior to that, the farmer had a tremendous amount of hard work and time-consuming control to help get that grain to a certain moisture content. The computer systems that this company had developed to do this had worked very well in the research and development stage, and they were deploying these onto actual working farms around the country. The problem is that they were failing miserably. And anytime that you have a product start to go to market and it fails miserably, especially a computer system, you have the hardware people saying that it's a software problem. You have the software people saying it's a hardware problem. I think we probably have all experienced that. Well, at this particular company, the hardware people had won and had convinced everybody that it was a software problem. So what do? Let's go to college, hire a software engineer right out of college and have him fix the software. The problem is I was there a couple weeks and I found the problem. It wasn't a software problem. It really wasn't what I would call a hardware problem. It was a power quality problem, meaning we were putting computer systems on farms. And as you can imagine, 30 years ago, trying to put a computer on a farm with the power quality problems, that's why it failed. And that's why I'm in this industry.
Boy, we sure have come a long way, haven't we, Dan?
Absolutely.
So today we're going to show you third-party tools that will help you make a solid business decision about whether to upgrade, co-locate, or build your data center. And the people that we have here in this room today have had enormous experience and have done all three. So with that said, I want to remind you that if you have any questions that you'd like to submit, please do so on the link that you have. You're able to send those in, and I will be able to look at those and make sure that the speakers here today get those and answer those for you. So today, Chris, what I'd like to do is start off with maybe why don't you share a little bit about some answers to questions that people often ask you about whether a business should lease or build a data center. You know, there are a lot of circumstances that drive managers to this option. So what are some of the things that you hear, and what are some of the circumstances that drive managers to consider doing one of these things?
When it comes to design, build versus co-location, there's several aspects of those decisions which we're going to spend quite a bit of time reviewing here during this webinar, but not all of them are necessarily direct questions that I get from these, IT managers or the CFO or the CTO or the CIO or whatever the case may be. They're things that I see come up indirectly, such as you can tell that there are certain organizations out there that they just straight out have issues with co-locating their environment, or they don't have their data center down the hall per se from their IT department. They think that their access is going to be restricted or whatever the case may be. I kind of categorize those types of people as server huggers, and that they really like the ability to walk out of their office down the corridor, go into the data center and start plugging and unplugging cables and doing work and things like that, where really in actuality, we've seen quite the opposite in terms of management in a co-location environment. In terms of uptime that's been delivered to the organization, where that IT person can't actually just walk down the hall and stick a server in and start plugging it in and making changes to the environment, when the IT people are separated from their IT equipment, there's a higher probability that they'll actually go through the proper change control policies and procedures that might be installed by the company, and create a higher level of organization in terms of implementation changes and things like that. So there's usually a barrier, in which case getting the mindset of the people that we're working with, that they don't always have to be 5 feet away from the server that's serving the content to them. The other big question that comes up is, do they really understand their costs? A lot of times people will say, well, if I rent space from someone, they're obviously making money off of, or they're making profits off of me being in their data center, but they're not considering the economies of scale that co-location facilities take advantage of, or the costs that maintenance schedules and activities and things like that, the costs of that are spread across multiple occupants of that particular facility, and they don't always know the true costs of operating and owning their own data center. An example that I would give is a new data center, or a new facility is going up. They're putting a data center in that facility. Utility services, electrical power is being delivered to that building. That is servicing the cubicles and offices, the data center, everything in that, the lighting, everything in that facility. And do you suppose that the electrical bill is divided up when it comes from Alliant Energy or Mid-American or whoever your service provider is, and the IT department actually knows and understands and has to pay for the cost of the electrical and cooling infrastructure that they're operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year? Or does that just go to a facilities person, and then they pay the electrical bill when they come in, not understanding that a lot of times the data center space is the cause for a significant amount of electrical draw within office complex. So those are the kind of the big two education points, I guess I would call them, when we're dealing with an organization that is trying to decide whether it's best in their best interest to either build a data center or look at co-locating their equipment into a facility that's already up and running.
Great points, Chris. Dan, you're out in the field a lot, and sometimes you're one of the first persons that a customer could come to and ask questions. What do you hear when you're out in the field?
Bottom line, what we want to do, what most customers want to do is come up way up front in the decision process of, do I want to upgrade my existing facility? In other words, I already have a data room, might even have what I'll call a data center, or I may just have a few data closets in a facility. Do I want to just take what I have and upgrade it? In other words, add new equipment to my existing facility for my new servers, routers, switches, or data storage devices? Or do I want to just go out and build a brand new facility from scratch? And obviously the third option is, do I want to possibly look at co-location? It really comes down to costs, cash flows, and what we call strategic factors. And we're going to talk about those strategic factors toward the end of this seminar today to help in the decision process. But right out of in the very beginning, what we want to do today is give you some tools to start having some conversations in your company to make one of those three decisions: upgrade, build new, or co-locate. The tools we're going to show you are tools that you actually have access to after this seminar. You'll be receiving an email after this seminar with links to the calculator tools that we're going to be looking at, so you can play with those tools, put in your own information, manipulate that information to make your own decision. But for illustration purposes here today, what we'd like to do is just take a base upgrade. In other words, you may already have equipment and you're looking to bring in new equipment. The base data center that we're gonna call it is a 100 kW of load data center. We're gonna make this a 5 kW per rack data center using traditional UPSs, traditional cooling, traditional redundancy power, and traditional redundancy cooling. And if you take that 100 kW divided by 5 kW, you get a data center with 20 racks. So this is going to be our base design where we compare, looking at upgrading, building new, or co-location. The first calculator here, once again, and I'm sure I'll say this more than once, you have total access to this calculator in the future to be able to put in your own numbers to make your own decisions of the basis of this seminar. But today, we're going to start off with what we talked about just a moment ago, 100 kW of data center with, and this is in the left-hand side of the calculator that you have under inputs. And we can see that we're the location of the data center, North America, United States, the data center capacity, 100 kW, the average power density, 5 kW rack. This is going back to this base slide that we showed you just a moment ago. We're showing an installation labor rate of $90 per hour. You can click on that and you can bring up different rates that may or may not be in your area. We picked 90 because that's typical for our area. The cooling system, a traditional chiller and perimeter computer room air conditioner. The UPS architecture, just a traditional non-scalable UPS. The redundancy levels, as we discussed before, 2N on the power, N+1 on the cooling. Next level is included in the cost. Obviously, if you're going to deploy new equipment, you're going to need new racks. We don't have a standby generator clicked in this because obviously if you're upgrading and you're making a deciding of upgrading your existing, you probably already own a generator.
The caveat there being, as long as your generator's been properly maintained and doesn't have astronomical amount of hours on the generator, usually it takes a lot of runtime in order to take a generator to the point where it needs to be rebuilt or replaced. So we're going to assume that the generators will be able to stay for this point.
Still underneath this, included in the cost, is when you upgrade, you're going to have to buy new switch gear, new panel boards. These are things that the electrical contractor have to install. Also, if you're going to be upgrading or building more, there's a possibility of fire suppression detection. But once again, as shown on here, you can select and deselect these pertaining to your exact facility. And then summarized at the very bottom on the left-hand column, once again, 100 kW, 5 kW rack is 20 racks, showing you your space. That all being said, on the right side are your results. And the bottom line results that we see over here to bring in a new 100 kW load to your existing facility for just the equipment and the installation of that equipment is right around $1.2 million. The calculator also lets you go and say, well, how much of that is power? How much is cooling? What's the UPS? And this is good information for you. But bottom line, executive summary, I guess you could say, is the fact that this is going to cost right around $1.2 million. Now, a lot of people at this point say, yeah, that's nice. That's a nice calculator. But how realistic is that calculator? Well, I can tell you that this particular calculator has been available for at least over 5 to 6 years. I have known scores of data centers that have already deployed an upgrade, and they actually go back and look at this calculator and say, well, how close was it? And we found that the large majority of people that use this calculator feel that it is a real truthful example of what it's going to cost to upgrade your existing data center. The other thing we need to take into consideration, we'll probably mention this again here in a few minutes, is how long does it take to do this. And I'm not talking about getting budget numbers and submitting them for budget approval, that whole process. That's a different world. I'm talking about you've made the decision to do it. How long is it going to take to deploy this? And we see the average upgrade going to be anywhere between 6 months to 1 year.
And I think there's a lot of variables that come into play there as well. For instance, do you need to do some type, is it a rip and replace type of an upgrade in that, you know, maybe you're expanding the size of your data center and you're introducing new space to your data center, in which case you're just adding components to the facility and making it larger, versus some type of an inline upgrade in that you've got space already allocated, you want to upgrade it with new technology or whatever the case may be, and you need to come up with processes and procedures that allow you to upgrade your data center while keeping the equipment that's currently located in there online and operational during that process, which can add quite a bit of time to an upgrade process too. So
the next calculator we want to look at is, all right, I don't have the infrastructure in my existing facility to upgrade or add new load. So it's time for me to go out and build a brand new data center. This is the shiny new toy that we typically see. Well, if I'm going to upgrade a data center, I want to build my own from scratch because I'm going to have all the latest and greatest fun things that I own. Sounds good. But how does that actually deploy? Well, once again, we're going to start in the upper left-hand corner, data center location. Obviously, you can select wherever here. Obviously, we're picking North America, United States. IT load profile, once again, back to our base example that we're using on each one of these so we can compare apples to apples, 100 kW. The next one is range at final IT load. What we mean is if you're going to build brand new, you're not just going to build it for the load you need today. You typically want to say, okay, I want to build it for 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And that's a whole nother discussion. How big is big and how big do I need to make it? For our illustration today, we're talking about doubling the size. In other words, in ramp up time of 10 years, we're going to go from 100 to 200 kW in our illustration. Once again, you can have this match whatever you have. The next one is your physical infrastructure. Once again, 100 kW. I'm going to deploy almost every year. My 2N redundancy, my perimeter, traditional perimeter air conditioner system. The next column is economizing hours. What this means is if you build your data center in an area where in the winter it's cold, you can actually use the fact that it's cold outside to help cool your data center. Now, I'm not telling you that you open the windows and let the cold air in. No, what we're using, the fact is we still have our traditional computer room air conditioner systems. We have indoor units, we have outdoor units. But the fact that it's cold outside, we can use that air to help cool our outdoor units and move that cool inside.
And that could be done in a couple different ways, whether it's water side economization or air side economization. There's pros and cons to those. And at the end of the day, that's a different seminar, though.
Exactly. But we're putting in 3,000. Actually, where we're located here today at the Enceva facility in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, it's not uncommon for them to see over 4,000 hours of economization using the fact that it's cold outside to help cool your data center. The next column is financial analysis. This gets into what's going to be very, very specific for your particular area. How much per kilowatt are you using? What are you typically doing in your facility with your CFO on depreciations? How much is it going to cost to borrow the money to build your data center? Here we're showing a 10-year depreciation, a 9% cost of capital, but obviously that can greatly vary depending on your company's particular instances. Included in this analysis, obviously, since this is a new data center, you're going to need new switchgear, new chillers, new generators, new raised floor systems. That all being said, on the left-hand column with our inputs, we can now go over to the right-hand column and look at the results. And once again, there's many different results. There's design parameters, growth plans, total cost of ownership, OPEX, yearly costs, things of those nature. But the bottom line, what we want to do right now, since we are our seminar here is about, okay, am I going to upgrade, build new, or co-locate? We're going to look at the bottom line. Bottom line is in the lower right-hand corner under budget required, and specifically under budget required, we're looking at what is the upfront cost of building that data center from scratch, and we're showing $4.2 million. Once again, how realistic is that? It's as realistic as this calculator has been used for years. We actually use this calculator to help figure out how we've built our data centers in the past, and that number comes in where we typically see their traditional data center costing. That being said, what's the deployment on one of those? Well, number one, since it's new, what's the deployment time for finding a place to put the data center? Deployment time of buying that property, hiring architects, engineers, mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, doing bids, getting competitive bids, going through that process, then actually getting all the permits and things that you need to do to build, start building, start moving dirt, start getting in infrastructure from the utility companies, and not just power. Do you have a location that's going to give you the access you need with the data access that you need? How long does that take? Well, we typically see a deployment of starting from scratch and building new on a perfect application 2 to 3 years. We've seen it take longer. I've seldom, if ever, see it take less than 2 years to make that happen. All right. So just to remind you, we were at 1.2 million to upgrade, 4.2 million to build from scratch. Let's look at comparing building your own or upgrading your own to a co-location. That's what this calculator can do for you. Once again, we start up upper left-hand corner, North America, United States. Under general, once again, our 100 kW growing to 2, 10-year. Here we're showing 10 kW rack. We back that up to 5 kW per rack. Total cost of capital, the same as before. Under our building, what we want to do is make sure that our building costs, leasing, bandwidth, OPEX, PUE matches the previous designer. And if you look under the results in the upper right-hand corner, under TCO summary, under 10-year TCO build, there's that $4.2 million again. So then if we go back to the left-hand column, we go down to the bottom under what are my co-location prices. I'll let Chris respond to those.
Sure. So having quite a bit of experience in the co-location market, I can tell you that a 5 kW cabinet in one of our facilities is going to run you about $1,000 a month. There's other components and things that need to be manipulated and changed based on some of your requirements and things like that. But that's a good round number for us to draw a comparison with. This is just a tad bit finicky on me trying to get that down to a 1K, but it's close enough for this webinar. In terms of space reservation, if you're a really large company and need a lot of space, contiguous space in the form of like a private suite or something of that nature, you may potentially look at needing to reserve space or something like that. But for the purposes of this webinar and our base data center size and load being revolving around the 10 cabinets type of a customer, we're going to assume that you're not in need of a particular private suite that might require hundreds of cabinets or anything like that. So we're not going to reserve any space for you. one of the benefits to co-location is that when you sign a contract to place your equipment in a co-location facility, there's a contract that says for X amount of time, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be, your cost to keep that equipment in that facility doesn't change. That's one of the benefits of a co-location facility versus a private data center, in that you have a predictable month-to-month cost in which it costs you to place your equipment, storage, servers, network equipment, things of that nature, in a multi-tenant multi-tenant facility. The next one down is the cost of power. I put $500 a month in there, which is roughly what the cost would be at a 5 kW cabinet running at 5 loads. So you're committing to a 5 kW cabinet, and you're actually using that cabinet up to 100% of its rated capacity within the data center environment. And then the last line item, which is bandwidth costs, you see that I put in $500 a month versus the bandwidth costs that Dan talked about in the build section, which was $2,000 a month. The difference there is there's usually a 50 to 90% cost decrease in acquiring things like internet access and circuits and things like that out of at least a larger co-location facility like the one that we're in here, that multiple carrier or service providers bring in redundant fiber optic infrastructure into the facility for the sole purposes of feeding and serving the customers of that data center. Because there's oftentimes 5, 10, 15, 20 plus service providers in that facility, competition ensues, and a lot of times the customer gets the benefit of vastly decreased cost to acquire things like internet and things like that. So that's the difference between the two internet costs for on-premise, having CenturyLink or MediaCom or something like that deploy, a couple hundred megs worth of internet versus acquiring that same capacity out of a data center environment. So now you can see the cost difference in the top right-hand corner, the TCO summary. The cost to the overall 10-year cost to operate your own data center comes in at about the $5.2 million number that we talked about before. But then right next to that, we see just a tad bit over $5 million to co-locate the same amount of space in a multi-tenant facility. Or sorry, for almost just a tad bit over $4 million, I'm sorry. At the graph that you see just underneath that, you can see your break-even point or your overlap comes in right at about 9 years, but your overall cost to operate both of these environments, your co-location is going to be cheaper. Now, a quick little scenario that I would like to go through everyone before we move on is I try and stay vendor neutral, but there are some unique capabilities of the data center that we happen to be doing this webinar from, and that's its ability or its design to do high density environments. So let's say that we work with an organization that enables us to do some hardware retrofits. There's equipment that's end of life and it's time to buy new servers and storage and things like that. And we work with them to take advantage of the high density capabilities of a data center such as this one. So instead of doing 5 kW in a cabinet, we'll do 10 kW in a cabinet. So if we try and do 10 kW in a private data center environment, you could start to see how those prices change. The cost actually comes down because you have to buy less cabinets. There's half the number of cabinets involved and things like that. We're going to bump up the cost of our cabinets just a little bit to about $1,200 a month to accommodate that twice the density. And then we also need to adjust our power costs in the co-location environment as well. So we'll double our power costs from $500 a month to $1,000 a month for this particular cabinet. And you can start to see that these numbers really become parallel. And we have just over a $1 million difference over the course of 10 years between building your own data center and co-locating your environment, which is one of the reasons why we put such an emphasis in high density environments with the data centers that we're building today.
Thank you, Chris. And let's move on.
The next slide that we're going to have up here is going to look at, it's more of a decision-making tool for you. We've looked at the calculators, and the calculators are going to enable you to actually use real numbers that you have in your organization to look at budgets, planning, or even is some high-level decision-making. The slide that we have up here now is we call it our consideration slide. We put this together for you. More is not necessarily a decision tool, but a conversation tool that you can have in your particular company, in your particular facility. And what I mean by that is Lori, Chris, and I have looked at all the different questions we typically get when we're talking to people, and we do. We build new data centers. We upgrade new data centers. We suggest people go to co-location. We do that every day. But what this does is give you a capability or a conversation tool of where is your company at, or where does your company want to go. And what we have here are a list of considerations for you. The very first one is we label that critical facilities enterprise. Chris, I'll let you talk about this one.
A quick interjection as well. We plan on sending this slide out to everyone at the end of the seminar as well, or the webinar, excuse me, so that you can go through this exercise yourself and put numbers in there, tally them up at the end, and help you make a decision in what path might be best for you. So in terms of critical facilities expertise, when I think of that, keep in mind that I'm not thinking of an organization that maybe has a couple of tower servers sitting in a closet or something like that. I'm thinking of a true, data center type of environment in which you have UPS systems, redundant cooling systems, redundant UPS systems actually, perhaps voltage transformation that takes place, switch gears, generators, things of that nature. Do you have expertise on hand, on premise, as part of your staff to handle incidents with these types of components? In other words, a UPS system goes into bypass and you're no longer getting power conditioning. Do you have people on staff that can address those situations? What happens if a generator goes into alarm, putting your data center at risk if there is a utility outage? What happens if your cooling infrastructure ceases to provide cooling and your data center temperature is going up a couple of degrees every 20 minutes? Do you have people on staff that could rapidly respond to those types of incidents and keep your data center up and running? That's what I think of when I think of critical facilities expertise.
And you, in using this consideration slide, 1 to 10, do you or don't you have those people in place? The next one is regulatory requirements. And this almost specifically talks to the concept of managing your data center day to day. And bottom line, let's say that you have a new rack of equipment and you need to get power to that new rack. In the past, was as simple as having someone on your staff go out, put the device in the rack, go get a power strip, put it in the rack, and find some place to plug that power strip in. What were all the considerations to do that? Very normal. What you have to do is, at a minimum, is maybe go to an existing power distribution unit, circuit breaker panel in your facility, and have someone run a new power circuit, voltage circuit over to that rack. Very normal thing that we do on the day-to-day operation of a data center. However, with the new requirements that we're seeing by OSHA, National Electrical Code, the NFPA, what procedures are needed to add circuit breakers to panels, add wire to panels that are energized. As of January 2015, the new NFPA 70E requirements for working on equipment that's energized have greatly affected how we look at what we do, not only in a data center, but in a facility for deployment of new equipment. Is your company up to speed with that? Are you meeting all of the new requirements? We find that most aren't. And in a typical co-location, the expansion of that type of equipment, power to the equipment, that's already done. You literally are coming in, putting your equipment in the rack and plugging it in. All the infrastructure is already there. Next one is life expectancy. And this, we put this in there because it's, a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but life expectancy means a lot more than, well, if I build the data center today, will it be, what am I going to do? How long is it going to be there? It's going to be here for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. No one ever has that conversation down. But bottom line, life expectancy also means, what do you do when stuff breaks? Things are going to break. What is the life expectancy of an internal component of a UPS system? You're going to have to plan to have service contracts, maintenance contracts on all that equipment in your facility. And that disappears when you go into a co-location.
Yeah. The other thing that I think of with life expectancy is how well can you plan the size of your data center? In other words, how well can you predict what your data center needs are going to be 10 years from now? I.e., is your IT infrastructure going to double in size over the next 10 years? Is it going to double in size over the next 2 years? The other thing that I've seen over the last 5 to 10 years or so, I've actually seen data center footprints decreasing in size thanks to virtualization technologies and hypervisors and things of that nature. So what happens when you yesterday built a data center with a growth strategy of your data center doubling over the size of the next 10 years, and now all of a sudden you find out that your data center is actually shrinking in real estate size, but actually increasing in terms of density. So now you run into a potential issue where you're actually wasting floor space within your office complex towards data center environments that at this point you may not ever need.
Deployment time frame. We've alluded to that throughout this entire seminar. I'll just reiterate once again. If you need something and you can plan for it to be a year or 2 to 3 years down the road, and you have time to build, that's quite often that's not the case. In other words, when do I need that new 100 kW? Well, someone's telling me that we've already bought the equipment and it's going to be at our dock next week. How long does it take to deploy? How long does it take to deploy in a co-location? I'll joke. I would assume you can come in this afternoon.
That's actually 100% correct. So I'd say most of your co-location facilities, they still bring in, anytime a new customer comes in to play, they bring in electricians to deploy electrical infrastructure into new cabinets and things like that. So there's prep work that takes place traditionally in a co-location environment. A lot of times it's in the Iowa market, I usually see 2 weeks. In the Chicago market, a lot of times I'll see anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. I can share with you a quick little story that I have from a customer that signed up with us to do offsite disaster recovery, where they're purchasing a half secure, half cabinet type of environment. They acquired, I believe it was like 100 megs of internet, in which they're going to use to replicate their on-premise data to an off-premise backup type of a situation where they could use it for disaster recovery purposes and things like that. At the receipt of their contract, some of the technologies and the design methodologies of the data center that we're sitting in here, we were actually able to turn around their co-location space, including power, cooling, internet, ready to rack and stack servers and storage, firewalls and whatnot, in less than 3 hours. So the turnaround time and the response time in co-location environments are certainly decreasing and turning into what I call more of a cloud type of approach, obviously with physical infrastructure come into play, it's hard for it to be absolutely instant. However, but it's getting closer and closer to the point where, like the cloud, you press a button and that service and resources available for you.
All right. Actually, the next 1, 2, 3 considerations could be lumped into one. However, we specifically broke them out. What we mean by that is, and Chris has already alluded to, company culture, meaning how comfortable are you with having to not be able to hug your server?
Yeah.
And we have found that the initial response to that, and Chris deals with it, and Lori deals with this a lot more than I do. I know the initial response is no way. I got to be able to hug the server.
Yeah.
But as you start looking at a whole lot of these other considerations, my experience has found that people, instead of this being a 1, it starts moving toward a 10 on your consideration.
Yeah. One thing that I'll point out is, in terms of considering being in a multi-tenant type of environment, or commingling your server equipment with other organizations under the same roof. There are a lot of co-location facilities, this facility included, that allow you to segregate or privatize your personal environment, either in the form of suites, which is something that we do, or maybe cage space, to add an additional level of security that separates you from the other people that are cohabitating in that data center facility. Sometimes there's extra costs associated with that, and cost obviously comes into play when you're analyzing build your own versus co-location, but the service is typically readily available.
The next one, IT accessibility to the data center. Yes, we've been talking about that, but I'd like to bring up a very, what I think is a big point here with accessibility to the data center. Companies that have their own data center on site that do not have a disaster recovery site, and they make a statement of, or they feel as though, okay, if my entire facility went down, along with it, my data center in that facility, what am I going to do? Can I continue to run my company? We have found that if you are at a co-location site, it's not uncommon today for a company to be able to continue to run its business with the employees at home, with the employees maybe at another site, or actually most co-location facilities have areas where employees can come to work there. That's a consideration of the co-location so that your business can continue to run.
Yep.
Dan, very good point. I just want to interject here real quick. We're getting some really good questions. We are anticipating to answer all those questions. We're doing really well on time. We're almost ready to wrap up the form here soon, but we might go over a little bit, so we invite you to stay on for the webinar, that we will be answering questions after we wrap up today. Thank you. Chris?
So perceived size of capital investment. Is that where we're at here?
Comfort with contracts. Actually, all 3 of those last 3, once again, can be lumped in, but we kind of broke them out so people can have individual conversations on those.
Sure. So in terms of dependencies on contracts, there's pros and cons to them. So usually pricing structure dictates that the longer you commit to space within a multi-tenant co-location facility, the bigger the discounts you get. So there's a reward with long-term contracts. However, short-term contracts are available too. There's 1-year agreements. I've seen just set up fees with month-to-month contracts that allow you to even test the waters of co-location if you want to, and see how it works for you. At the end of the day, though, what's your level of comfort in terms of stabilizing the cost in which you spend on your data center environment? Are you would you rather spend large capital investment in building your own data center and then having a lower operational cost, which might have some unexpected expenses when you have problems such as a fault of a piece of equipment that's no longer under a maintenance contract if you're not setting up maintenance contracts and things like that, versus a predictable month-to-month contract that you are up for you is a month-to-month contract in which you know what your expense is going to be. The other benefit to that is that you know what your month-to-month expense is going to be. In other words, you're not going to have unexpected increases in expenses for your data center unless you're either growing or needing more capacity or something of that nature.
And that really sums up the last three.
Yeah.
All right. And when we send this form out, we really want to encourage you to really be honest about the stages that you're at and complete your rating in honesty, because we've got a scale at the bottom here that really talks about if you're 1 to 40, then yes, design build is a consideration and probably a recommendation. If you're anywhere between 41 and 60, you could go either way based on finances, based on timing, etc. But if you're over 61, you really need to consider co-location. And obviously we have experts here at Enceiva that can guide you on this process. Dan's available, Chris is available for one-on-one consultations. But we really recommend that you use this form to your advantage. So wrapping up today, we really talked about consider your business's needs and the plans and your financial preferences. What stage is your business at strategically? What does your business look like long term? We often find that some businesses will look at, what is really more short-term needs, but they really should be looking at the long-term growth for their company. In addition, how long is this going to take? What's the timing? We heard from Dan earlier about, yes, it could take 6 months to a year to build, but do you have land? How long is it going to take you to acquire land? And is it close to data? Do you have access to data? So those are a lot of considerations before you jump into these major decisions for your business. And we invite you to really take a look at the long-term growth strategy for your company. We also heard Dan talk a little bit about disaster recovery, and I've been hearing a lot about that in the last few days from visitors that we've had here at our data center for tours. And a lot of companies are really not in a position to really think about that, or they put plans in place for that. And I always say it's like buying life insurance. You really don't need it, but when you do need it, it's a good thing you have it. Nobody really wants to think about a disaster, but when you do, it's a good thing that you've put these plans in place. So to wrap up, we've got about 6 minutes left for our webinar today. We've got some really good questions. So one of the first questions came from Nick, and Dan answered this, and if you'd like to elaborate at all, the question was, how long does it take to build a data center? That came on early into our webinar today. On average, you mentioned 6 months to a year. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Well, and once again, that was if you already have the facility, you already have the land, you already have the what I call the power infrastructure, the place, the location, and the power to the location. That's 6 months to a year. However, if you're looking to start from scratch, best perfect case scenario, 2 years. We've seen that go 2 to 3, and we've seen it be 4 to 5 when you consider the decision to do it and then having to do everything from that point forward.
Good answer, Dan. Next, this question came from Daniel. How do I access my infrastructure in a co-location environment?
Very similar to how you access it now. So you have servers, storage, network infrastructure, and things like that on premise. And really all it boils down to is There's several ways to do it. I've seen some of our smaller companies and organizations in our facilities leverage high-speed, inexpensive internet connections and VPN tunnels to access resources here in the data center, whether it be co-location, cloud infrastructure as a service, or any of those types of deployments. We have customers here that leverage their existing MPLS network. So let's say that it's an organization that has, a headquarters. Actually, one comes to mind where they have a headquarters here in Hiawatha, but they also have satellite offices in Des Moines, East Moline, Crystal Lake, Germany, UK, and I think there's one other. There's one up in Cedar Falls as well. So they have a combination of VPN connections and MPLS network in which they just extend that MPLS network into the data center, or include another site into their MPLS network to allow for privatized, highly available communications between all of these remote offices, their headquarters, and their new data center space in a co-location, cloud, or infrastructure as a service type of environment. And point-to-point circuits are another option as well. So you go to, a CenturyLink, a Windstream, an IMON, a Mediacom, or whatever the case may be, and you procure from them not internet access, but a privatized circuit just from your location to the data center environment that extends your network, your on-premise network, into the data center, allowing for seamless communications between what used to be an on-premise data center to now an off-premise data center. Excellent question.
Great, thanks, Chris. Next, this question comes from Simon. What are the average contract length for co-location? Will the cost remain the same?
The cost, the cost generally remains the same, at least in my experiences. I can certainly talk about my own facilities, but I can only imagine that there are facilities out there that have caveats in them that allow them to adjust pricing models during the middle of a contract if, for say, some type of natural disaster took place, or changes in utility rates or something like that that were unexpected, may potentially be due to some type of natural disaster or something like that. Generally speaking, though, unless your demands change, their pricing to be in co-location is pretty steady month to month. In terms of contract lengths, that can vary quite a bit. So we have, smaller half cabinet customers that may only sign a 1-year contract, and then they renew that contract year to year, month to month after that contract has been completed. But then we have much larger entities that occupy our facilities, healthcare systems, defense contractors, things of that type of nature, that have contracts that extend into the 10-year time frame. So they can be very short in nature. They can be very long in nature. A little bit ago, maybe halfway through the session, I kind of alluded to the fact that a lot of times in a co-location and even cloud infrastructure as a service, the longer your commitment. So if you have the ability to say, yes, this is what our needs are going to be for the next 3 years, then you'll a lot of times incur cost savings by committing to a 3-year contract versus a 1-year contract.
Thank you, Chris. And reminder that we will extend our time for a few minutes to answer a few more questions that we have. For those of you that need to leave, we have recorded the webinar today. We will follow up with a link to the recorded webinar, which will include the form and the calculator link, so that you'll be able to go in and do some of this analyzation yourself. And it will also have some of the questions with answers as well. We also have a question here from Tara, and she asks, what are the considerations of upgrading my existing data center? What is involved?
I'll go ahead and take that one. You can start looking at your existing data center. Obviously, it's going to take, to answer that question, even before you have your initial conversation internally with either your IT staff or your facility staff, or even before you start having those conversations with one of the IOs or one of the COs, the CIO, CFO, CEO, whatever, you really probably need to have a walkthrough. Bottom line, what I mean by that is you need to have in your own mind roughly how much equipment are you looking at adding? And there's information today from most of your manufacturers out there that are in the world of supplying UPS systems, power and cooling systems. They have relationships with equipment manufacturers to say, okay, I'm putting in X number of HP, whatever pieces of equipment. Well, most manufacturers out there have a pretty good idea of what that load is actually going to be. So meaning you need to at least have an idea. Am I going to add 10 kW of load? Am I going to add 50? Am I going to add 100? Once you have that number, that initial walkthrough is going to be with someone that's in this business that can start saying, okay, this is where you're at now. This is the infrastructure you have. This is the circuit breakers you have. These are the panels you have. This is the chiller you have. This is the cooling system you have. This is where you're at now. And use someone that does this on a regular basis that can at least start giving you ideas. Well, and what I mean by that, giving you the 10,000 foot view. And what the 10,000 foot view would be is if you're in a perfect world, that person says, well, you want to add 100 kW? Well, you have 200 kW capacity, so you really don't have to do anything. That's the perfect answer. On the other side, the answer may be, well, you are using 100 kW now, and you really only have 90 kW capacity, so you're having problems. You almost always have to have someone come in and walk you through that process. And there are people that do that on a regular basis.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And we're going to wrap up with a final question here. This is from Michelle. If I build my own data center, how do I control my own costs?
Well, that's something I think maybe we could tag team a little bit. So there's a lot of variables that come into play there. The first thing that I think of when I think of controlling costs, in other words, stabilizing and knowing how much you're going to spend on a regular basis. Maintenance contracts are certainly something that I see coming into play there. In other words, if you neglect to keep your maintenance contracts active and a chiller goes down, you're going to have costs associated with having that chiller repaired. Unexpected costs, usually. You can't predict when a chiller is going to fail, or normally you can't. A UPS system or a generator, throw a piston through the block or something like that. You typically can't predict those types of things. So having not only maintenance programs, regular maintenance programs, but perhaps even extended manufacturing warranty and even insurance would have to come into play to manage and understand what your costs are going to be over a long-term, like 10-year period of time. That doesn't mean that that is going to be your cheapest way to maintain your facility. In other words, extended maintenance contracts with manufacturers, insurance, things of that nature, those are really, really expensive. And in the long run, chances are you'll spend more in those contracts than you would have spent having someone actually come in and perform repairs as needed. That being said, you're going to have unexpected expenses pop up in that type of a scenario. So a contractual obligation to deliver a service from a third-party vendor in the form of like co-location or cloud or something like that is, in my opinion, really the only way to not only control your expenses, but have them be very predictable at the same time and be low cost in nature. Dan, you want to add to that?
I'm actually going to answer that question differently.
Okay.
Mainly because that's one of those questions that I think you can truthfully say you have no idea. But to be able to answer it, you're going to have to talk with someone that has experience in actually running and maintaining a data center. So you're going to have to talk to people that not necessarily sit around and dream them up. I'm talking about people that actually get up in the morning and go and work at a data center. In other words, experience. Okay? The next thing you're going to need to have is information. Where do you get the information? You not only need to talk to this group of people and get information about the expenses, You need to talk to this group and that group and that group. The more people you talk to that actually, I'll go back to the one before, have the experience in the world, can help you decide what's it going to cost. And the last thing you need to have with that entire group of people is a comfort level that you feel you're actually getting real information instead of getting somebody trying to sell you something.
That's great, Dan. Thank you so much for your honesty and candidness. We're wrapping up our webinar today, and I want to say thank you to Dan Maxey and Chris CV, and to remind everyone and let everyone know that we're here. We're available to you at any time should you have any questions. We do have, I want to let you all know of another webinar. And we have a regular NCEVA webinar series, and we're excited to announce that our next webinar will be Wednesday, August 19th at 10 a.m. And that webinar is titled Choosing the Right Cloud Environment. And that webinar will be given by Chris Jensick. He's our Senior Network Engineer with NCEVA, and we're very proud to be able to present that to you on Wednesday, August 19th at 10 a.m. Wrapping up today's webinar, we want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for our speakers, and invite everyone to have a great day.
Thank you.